My guts are bugging me this morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it from the boredom of last night?
Maybe the food and the scotch.
What did you guys eat?
Oh, everybody brought different food over. There was a lot of chicken. A lot of like there was just drumstick chicken, and then someone made like this spicy Korean chicken, which was fucking delicious. Uh,
That's it. That's what's bothering your guts, I'm
okay,
sure.
Rie made borscht, and
Oh, nice.
she's really good at it. Like Russians, or I should say, a Russian was very, very impressed. She's like, I can't even make it this good.
Nice. Yeah, Katya's mom made borscht last time we were there too.
And apparently, the Russians just call it borscht, not borscht.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So maybe part of the reason we make fun of Russians for having so many consonants together, maybe we're just adding them.
It's a Hungarian word, I think, actually,
Oh,
right? Isn't it?
I don't know.
It's a Hungarian dish, I think.
I thought it was a Russian dish. Why are you unable to connect?
I'm sure there's disputes over that. Maybe there was even wars fought. Um,
In that area of the world, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
for the borscht.
Yeah. Fucking in Greece, they have wars over whether or not to spell things the classical way or the you know modern way.
Yeah. The Christians had wars over whether you want to say and the sun or not say that
Right.
at the end of the document.
What the fuck? Okay. Where do I find the stream key on Odyssey?
Okay, I don't know. Let's see. Let's try it.
Uploads. Okay, here it is. It's live.
Fuck. Oh, okay, it's probably this one. Seriously?
Support, share. If I click share, no. Support, no. More, no. Are you going to make me redo this, Odyssey? Okay, we're just gonna do it again.
What?
Now what?
I'm trying to log into my paste bin on my on my on this computer. And I've entered exactly the same password as on the other computer where it did let me in. What the fuck?
By the way, I noticed you.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed you haven't tripled my money yet.
It just went on a shopping spree
You've had
for
5 minutes.
I know. It's a good day today, actually, to buy. Because stocks just came down after Putin started talking, I guess. So, buy the dip opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just spent all your money.
All of it?
So yeah.
Cool. On one stock, or did you break them up a little bit?
Well, I broke it up. I increased the amounts for both of them equally,
Yeah.
and then I also added a position of Coinbase.
Like buying stock in Coinbase?
Yeah,
I didn't even know it was publicly traded. That's
yeah,
funny. Okay,
it is, and it's like it's so cheap. It's a steal right now.
because Peter
I
Sahan's up there trashing it after the FTX debacle. when we know that that might not really be useful information.
Yeah, Coinbase has been struggling since it's had its IPO.
Yeah.
So they had their IPO at like $300, and now they're down to $50.
Oh shit.
I bought at 150, unfortunately. So once again, you're lucky. You're getting you're getting it at a better time.
I'm getting the 66%. I'm getting the J Dyer discount.
Yeah, exactly. It's at $51 right now, and that's not a whole lot of. It's like five five times profits.
Well, ETF or whatever it is.
Earnings, yeah, earnings per share, EPS. Earnings per share are $9.78. That's incredible for a risky Nasdaq future-oriented stock, and not just any future, but crypto, like the future of futures.
The riskiest of the
And
risky.
yeah, and it's like 5.3 times profits. I mean, the fact that they're profitable is already incredible. But then the stock is so cheap on top of that. So yeah, should be good. Unless they go bankrupt or something, then it was all for nothing, obviously. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Okay. So there's about 3,000 in Faz, a little over 3,000 in Teckle, and about 4,000 in Coinbase. Got it.
Yeah. But yeah, some people are thinking, like Mike Norman thinks that stocks have dipped because Putin is about to declare war. But
On,
it's,
on who?
well, in Ukraine.
I
Um,
what? Putin hasn't declared war on Ukraine. What?
no, no, he's called it a special military operation so far.
Yeah, okay.
So he sent a tweet from someone at Trade Hubble, Black
Yeah.
Swan Foundation, retirement right. Breaking: Russian sources claiming Putin will announce the conclusion of the operation and declare war in a speech tomorrow.
Well,
Which his
knowing
speech is today, so I don't know. Maybe he tweeted it, but it says January 18th. So I don't know.
yeah. Well,
Maybe he has another speech tomorrow.
knowing Putin, he's really into following the letter of the law.
Yeah.
Like I know, for example, like the Russian constitution says something to the effect of military troops can only be deployed for defensive purposes,
Yeah.
and so yeah,
Yeah, that's why the republics. That's why I needed the republics
right,
in
because
the
now
east.
he's defending the republics, right?
Yeah.
Shit like that. So I'm sure it's some move where he's doing some shit like that. Hold on, I'm gonna adjust this camera. Try making myself a little bigger today. Okay. Um. So it looks like. Can you check audio on the various streams? Well said.
I'll check Odyssey. I think if it's fine on Odyssey, it's gonna be fine everywhere. It's not showing on Odyssey. It's supposed to. I configured. Oh wait. Um, seems to not be streaming on Odyssey at all.
Oh, I bet if I turn Odyssey on, it'll stream.
That's possible. That's a theory. Checking YouTube. The fifth, it's the oh yeah, the fifth expansion. Yeah. Super choppy.
Super choppy. Okay, let me reset this. Okay, I just reset the audio. Let's see if that clears up. Let me reset this. Okay, I just reset the audio. Let's see if
Hello, hello.
clears up. Yep. Hello. Does it sound better?
Yeah, I'm just testing myself.
Okay.
I heard you already.
Let's see if
Hello, hello. Yeah, better now. New subscriber. Whoop-de-doo.
They're coming in slow, but they're coming in.
They be coming. We're taking over the world. Slowly. One subscriber at a time.
Yeah. I liked what you said on the last show or the one before where you're like, hey, we don't ask you for any fucking money.
Yeah.
Spread this. Like, we're probably the only fucking show you've ever heard that's not like, hey, please donate. Right?
Exactly.
We're not selling you shit. We're not asking for money. We're demanding money. Send us a fucking check.
We just demand obedience, loyalty, and proselytizing on our behalf. That's all we want.
Send us a fucking check.
We just demand obedience, loyalty, and proselytizing.
Proselytizing.
Proselytizing. Whatever.
That's a big word for a second language, is there, Nima, or a third language?
Yeah, I mean, this point it's probably more like my first language,
Yeah.
which is very sad.
That's the way for Rie now. She has a harder time speaking Japanese than English.
Really?
Yeah.
How long has she been here?
Since she was 18.
Okay.
Posting around. God, Elon Musk cracks me the fuck up. He's got a new poll. Should the World Economic Forum control the world? Yes or no? Where'd that poll go? I want to answer. Here, no. What 14% of the motherfuckers said yes?
That's the attendees. Twitter is now the #1 news app on the App Store.
Good. Did you see my post of Elon Musk fucking trolling everybody with his
Yeah.
not his status, but like just straight up saying he's state affiliated media?
Yeah. So, he took that off.
He did? Oh. Okay. I think everything's working here. So let's do one more sound check. I'm going to put this back on to starting soon. Okay, local sound check. Test, 1, 2, 3.
Checking 1, 2, 3. I'm thinking I should put this whole outline in a nicer format.
Test, 1, 2, 3.
Checking 1, 2, 3.
Sounds good. Are you talking about your show notes?
Yeah, my civilization notes.
I'm basically ready when you are.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Let's do it. Actually, before that, I've got to...
Let me get my
What the hell was that, Nima?
What was it?
That scramble back to get your tea was pretty funny. So I was just flipping through EvCiv here, and on near the end in Western civilization, I just read something I underlined, which is exactly what we were saying in the last show. In these deflationary periods, as low prices drove corporations to bankruptcy, bankers were able to assume control of them, to consolidate them into larger units of monopolized industry, and to reap the profits of reorganization of reflotation of securities. One
And to what?
sentence. What's that?
And to what? What was the last part?
To and to reap the profits of reorganization and reflotation of securities.
Okay.
So basically, deflate the currency, bankrupt the corporations, come in, scoop them all up, and then reflate and then you control everything.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that is, I think that's how finance capitalism turns into monopoly capitalism.
Yeah.
Or no, no, that doesn't make sense. Because bankers controlling everything, that is finance capitalism. And then monopoly capitalism happens because of the crises and the the scale that business has grown to thanks to large stock flotations.
Hmm.
And then companies become so powerful they can finance themselves again. So it's something else, I
This
guess.
was under third age of expansion for the West, and
Which
I
is
think he's discussing the conflict between industry and finance in this section, like
right.
how they vie for power.
Because the third expansion is what started with industrial capitalism, then turned to financial, then monopoly capitalism was the conflict stage.
Hmm. Thus, there appeared a dichotomy between bankers and industrialists, with one eager for a high value of money and high interest rates, the bankers, while the other was eager for high prices of goods, thus low value of money and low interest rates. For a long time, the dichotomy between the two did not come into the open because bankers succeeded in befuddling industrialists on financial matters, presenting them as abstruse subjects in which industrialists' wisest course would simply to be to follow the banker's advice. As long as the industrialist was dependent on the banker for capital, he had to use that advice, even when he sometimes suspected that the interests of the two may not be identical. But few industrialists before Henry Ford even realized that the interest of bankers and industrialists were opposed.
Right. So then basically finance capitalism, or finance asserts control as long as the monopoly, like the industrials don't notice the advantageous position that they're actually in. And then once they go, oh wait, we don't need these assholes, then it turns more into monopoly
Right.
capitalism.
Let me keep reading this. This every time. It's like I've read this book 4 times, and I just keep going back like, holy shit. So this opposition of interests between the two appeared most clearly when there was an insufficient supply of money for the growing industrial structure. This insufficient supply of money was based on the insufficient supply of gold. What the fuck did we just talk about? Since the bankers controlled the supply of money through the mechanism of the gold standard. The bankers called the use of the gold standard, in quotes, stabilization,
Yeah.
and insisted that it provided a stable value to money. It did no such thing, but rather provided provided stable foreign exchanges for the currencies based on gold and a growing value to the money. The growing value to the money on the gold standard occurred because the supply of money could not increase as rapidly as the supply of goods. Accordingly, the overall tendency was for prices to soften during the whole period of 1770 to 1931, except when there's sudden increases in the world's gold supply. The tendency generally benefited bankers and injured industry by increasing the value of money and the costs of credit and making profitable industrial operations more difficult. And then there was the next part that I underlined where the deflationary periods caused the corporations to crash and then the banks could gobble them up.
Yeah, the period of stabilization is. We also read from that a while ago in regards to the Great Depression, the preceding decade to the Great Depression, which quickly refers to the period of stabilization. So I wonder if that's the same thing he's referring to there when he says stabilization, which was basically aimed at stabilizing foreign exchange, but then caused ended in depression.
So yeah, I think what he's saying here is that what we just described were the deflationary periods and finance, and they were dependent on the bankers' advice, and also probably the capital because it wasn't enough capital, right? And once they figured it out, it started switching over to monopoly capitalism, where they went, meh, we don't need your asses anymore.
Yeah, and it's also MMT, right? MMT says if there's a lack of deficits or current account surpluses, in other words, net private savings, then the private sector will go to the banking sector and go and get there. And that debt is much more unsustainable. And if that debt grows too large in comparison to income, then the foundation of the economy becomes that much more shaky. And then there's going to be a crash at one point. And then, depending on what the government does, a recession or a depression or a quick recovery.
Let me stop before we get lost in that for an hour and don't start the show.
Yeah.
All right, let me close this. Get rid of Telegram so it doesn't bug me. Don't need that. No, I do need that. Okay. Here we go.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hello, this is Dylan Moore and Nima Majur of Irida TV coming to you today. We are doing it live. It's Tuesday. It's Wednesday. It's Wednesday, January 18th, 2023, and we are going to be continuing our, I guess it's along the lines of the series of the evolution of civilizations, but we're going to be referring specifically to what might be a fifth age of expansion for the West. Oh my, what do we mean by that? Well, if this is new language to you, I totally recommend going back and checking out our other shows on the evolution of civilizations. We did quite a few of those in the past. And this entire concept of the evolution of civilizations, the way that we're coming at it from, is based on, I think, what we could call a scientific hypothesis by the now dead since the 70s of a man named Carroll Quigley. The scientific hypothesis is a scientific hypothesis applied to history, which may sound silly until you actually read the book and go over what he's hypothesizing. And it's essentially, how do we look at history, not as just this constant influx of data points that aren't necessarily related to each other? How do we really draw a pattern in a way that we could use that pattern to predict into the future? And specifically, that pattern that Quigley describes is how social organizations, and it doesn't matter what they are, it could be your local church group, it could be a government, it could be a civilization, it could be a whatever, how any social organization eventually, or I should say any social organization that's created to achieve a certain purpose, will eventually, in quotes, institutionalize and start serving itself over the needs of that original purpose, and often maybe in contradiction to that original purpose. The example that we always love to give, right? Okay, an army is created to defend the nation, and then at some point the army starts feeding itself into the military-industrial complex, and where the defending the nation becomes secondary, and maybe it even gets to the point where the army starts attacking its own civilization. The army starts attacking its own society or civilization because it decides that's the best way to feed itself, which is obviously in direct contradiction to the point that it was originally created. So Quigley points out that this is kind of an iron law of societies, of societal organizations, that there is a natural tendency for this to happen. And if we could say that there's a natural tendency for this to happen, now we can predict what's going to happen with any specific society or any specific societal organization, and potentially we can address it to try to not have it happen in the future. Now, on a civilizational scale, Quigley defines a civilization having basically one unique characteristic that defines that civilization, which is that civilization's instrument of expansion. So we've got this term instrument, which is a societal organization created to achieve a certain goal, versus the institution, which that instrument eventually turns into, which is contradictory to its original goal. So any civilization has an instrument of expansion, which ends up creating... We're going over this real quick because we need to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. The instrument of expansion creates surplus, invests that surplus into invention. Wait, am I skipping a step? It creates surplus, saves that surplus, and invests that surplus into invention in the society, which helps create more surplus. And
you combine two components into one. Invests into invention. Yeah, so savings, investment, and invention are the three components of the instrument of expansion.
Okay, there we go. So once that as long as the instrument of expansion is doing that and it's benefiting the general public, and I'm, with an asterisk on that general public, because for most societies, most civilizations in history, there was a large slave group that may or may not have benefited from it directly. But if you're an, in quotes, citizen of that civilization, the instrument of expansion should benefit you. Now, once that instrument of expansion becomes institutionalized and the controlling members of society that control that instrument of expansion start using the surplus to benefit themselves, they're building pyramids and ziggurats and having 4 million slaves and coliseums and all this stuff that doesn't actually contribute to growth, that's when we start seeing the civilization decline. Now, Nima's got the 7 stages of civilization pulled up there. I'm not going to go over them because you can go back and listen to our previous episodes on the evolution of civilizations. The important thing to understand here is that civilizations grow with their instrument of expansion. Once the instrument of expansion becomes institutionalized, they start to get into what's called an age of conflict, because the society, typically turns to wars in order to overcome the fact that the society is not reaping the benefits that it once received from the contributions that it's giving. For example, the society is still collecting taxes. Are you getting the benefit from those taxes? No. Well, let's send you over to fight and die in a foreign war, so maybe we can collect enough booty to pay for the survivors back home, right?
It's not necessarily just war. The conflict is also internal. Mm-hmm. So the big symptom of the institutionalization of the instrument of expansion is that those who control the instrument of expansion are no longer interested in expanding the supply of goods, the population, the land occupied, all the things that have contributed to the age of expansion. Those things don't benefit the vested interests anymore. But what rather ends up benefiting them is to restrict the supply of goods, to restrict the population, is to restrict everything, because that's part of that iron law that Quigley identified of instruments turning into institutions. And once the instrument is an institution, the people running it, they have no other incentive than to restrict and to restrict and to restrict, because first of all, they're old.
They get replaced. If they didn't force the restrictions, the people would invent something else, create something else to get the job done, and then they'd lose all their power.
And they are so used to the structure in which they have the power, and they're so used to the old ways that it's completely anathema to them to try something new. In fact, they would probably have to subordinate themselves
Yes.
to more knowledgeable new people in that whole structure. And psychologically, they don't want to do that.
Yeah, power-hungry psychopath can't handle that.
Right.
Yeah.
So from their standpoint, turning to restriction is the only choice that's rational to them. It's like instinctively, it's instinctive basically. It's what they are incentivized to do based on their position, based on the skills they have, or rather lack thereof, based on the whole context in which they still are trying to be relevant, but in reality, their power is sliding away and they're holding on.
Which, I mean, I think you gave a perfect description of why this is kind of an iron law. This are things that occur or that emanate from the fact that there's natural human characteristics that go into leading an instrument down the path of institutionalization, right? So,
and nobody within that structure, right? Barely anyone within that structure says, "Hey guys, let's sit down and theorize and philosophize over whether this is the right thing to do."
Or whether this organization, the social organization, is still achieving the goal that it was originally supposed to achieve, right? So, all civilizations minus one. What's the special civilization, Nima? All civilizations minus one have gone through this growth and death curve where, Nima had them pulled up here. So, again, I'm not going to get into these in any detail, but there's a mixture: gestation, expansion, age of conflict, universal empire, decay, and the civilization, after it's decayed a certain amount, eventually gets invaded by a neighboring society and no longer has any sort of internal fortitude enough to resist that, right? I mean, a perfect example of this would be classical civilization, at least the western half of it, the western half of the Roman Empire. By the time the Germanic tribes came smashing through in the 400s, the 5th century AD, that no one cared enough about the classical idea to defend it at that point. And then the whole thing went away after that. So the West, however, in particular, has been unique in the fact that once we've gotten to the age of conflict, something has happened where if the conflict is centered around a certain point, somewhere off on the periphery of the civilization, a new age of expansion gets kickstarted where the old age of conflict kind of becomes dumb and nobody cares about it anymore. To be specific about this, because we're going to be getting into what's going on in the West right now, because it's kind of important on the West and the world stage. Is so the West starts out kind of in this knights and churches sort of feudal manorial system, right? The age of expansion starts off with these people trading with each other. So that didn't mean anything. With the self-sufficient manners having enough surplus that they're able to trade with each other in luxury goods. And so the instrument of expansion is how to it's a capitalistic instrument of expansion. Capitalism in this case meaning the pursuit of profit within a price structure, and people got more profit by expanding the flow of goods, like what Nima was saying before, and then they later find in the institutionalized version they find out they could make more money restricting the flow of goods. And then it was I always get it wrong. Was it William the Conqueror from England? Well,
I think so.
So it's William the Conqueror from England. I mean, don't shoot me if I get these dates wrong. I'm thinking 12th century, that attempts to conquer this. And so what was the military technology at the time? It was a mounted knight on horseback. Well, around that time, a new instrument of expansion is getting formed, which essentially is, my understanding basically, is that commercial capitalism is really able to utilize boats, in the Mediterranean and up and down the Atlantic and the Baltic Seas, where William the Conqueror, you just won the Age of Swords. We're getting close to entering the Age of Muskets. So great that you won that. We're on to a new game. And so that new game supplants, I guess, the old game, and a new age of expansion is started. And I mean, this is where we get, like, basically Europe exploding out into the world. This is the age where, once we get into the 1400s and the 1500s, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish, the English all start bursting forth into the world and setting up maritime trade across the entire world and setting up colonies. Well, this starts to crystallize again. Okay, we make more...
By the way, it was Henry III, I think, is what you're thinking of.
Henry III? He was the conqueror?
No, William the Conqueror was in the 11th century.
Uh-huh.
So you're thinking, so it was during Henry III and or Edward I is when the English tried to consolidate power over the first
Western
generation of commercial capitalism.
Okay, thank you. So then, like we said before, this second phase of capitalism, everybody makes money by increasing the flow of goods, and then it starts to institutionalize where a vested interest realizes, oh, we can make more money if we restrict the flow of goods. And this leads into the crystallization where Napoleon tries to take the whole thing over. Well, Napoleon is, in a certain sense, nearly successful, but on the periphery in England, something new happened, which was called the Industrial Revolution. So Napoleon, great, you just won the War of Muskets. We just invented machine guns, and we're playing a new game, so have fun with that, right? So that embarks us on the third age of expansion in Western civilization, which we could call the Industrial Revolution, and we end up with industrial capitalism, where, again, I mean, it's the same description where, okay, everybody makes more money and we expand by increasing the flow of goods. And in this case, it's mass goods, mass production with industrial capitalism. And then at some point, we won't get into the financial capitalism, industrial capitalism, and financial capitalism, monopoly capitalism. That's take us too long for the show. But at some point, everything starts becoming monopolies. And we get another situation where the monopolists figure out, okay, we make more money if we restrict the flow of goods. And this crystallizes, and Germany, Hitler, ends up being the attempted conquering unit that tries to conquer the core of Western civilization. He loses, and now, up until this point, we've been pretty much been regurgitating what Carroll Quigley has written in his books, both Tragedy and Hope, but primarily Evolution of Civilizations, which is, as we discussed many times, we like that book even more than Tragedy and Hope, even though Quigley is more famous for Tragedy and Hope. And he writes these books in the 60s. So Evolution of Civilization is written in the 60s, which isn't that long after World War II and this attempted universal empire by Germany. So even Quigley admits, he's like, I'm a little bit too recent after World War II to give a clear historical idea of what's going on here. And then he dies, I think in the earlier mid-70s. So we're left with, okay, does the West enter a fourth age of expansion after World War II? And this is something that me and Nima have discussed ad nauseum, and I think we've got a clear, or more specifically, Nima called me the other day with a very clear outlook on what the age of expansion looks like. And if we entered this fourth age of expansion, which we're going to make the argument for, have we now entered a fourth age of conflict? And if we've entered that fourth age of conflict, are we seeing the rumblings of a fifth age of expansion, which I guess is the Western tradition that other civilizations don't have a tradition of? They just eventually die from invasion. Do we have a fifth age of expansion to look forward to in the increasing craziness that we see going on, which are clear indicators of an age of conflict? So I think that sets us up, Nima, for what we're going to talk about today. Why do you think we've entered a fourth age of expansion, or we had entered a fourth age of expansion after World War II?
This is based on what we've recently learned from looking into Peter Zehan's analysis of the meaning and the extent of globalism and or globalization or whatever you want to call it. And we found that it kind of neatly matches up with Quigley's theory of, okay, what has happened after the third age of conflict, which ended in 1945? What's that new system that came out after that emerged after that? And I think with the help of Zehan's analysis, it's pretty clear that we've seen a fourth age of expansion beginning in 1945 and lasting all the way through around 2015 is where Zehan puts it. And why is it an age of expansion? Well, because the amount of goods produced, the amount of territory controlled, or
the population growth,
the
scientific development,
right? Scientific developments. This was a period of unprecedented economic growth, actually. And according to Zehan, it was, to a large extent, it was because the U.S. Navy began patrolling the oceans. And so shipping costs per product, which used to always be somewhere around 50% or maybe even more per product, has now come down to a rounding error. So that has changed the game significantly in that anyone could pretty much acquire anything they wanted within a reasonable amount of time and a reasonable cost.
From anywhere in the world.
From anywhere in the world, right. So this has helped certain political units join the Western hemisphere in terms of trade, and it has helped everyone specialize in what they can do best, economies of scale, etc., etc. And that is, I think, what Quigley tried to describe as a pluralist economy. I took some, I wrote down some keywords here regarding what I think has characterized this period of growth beginning in 1945.
Can you zoom in a little bit more?
Oh yeah, let's see.
Yeah, that'll work.
So we have, so since 1945, I also was wondering if maybe that's what some people refer to as technocracy, although technocracy might just be the later stage of it all. But the importance of lobbying groups over just politics and or individual businesses, technocrat managed is what Quigley himself characterized the system as. Scientism has become the dominant dogma throughout the second half of the 1900s. And I think it's like, the 1800s were really when this all started, right? And also when atheism became big and popular, and that was the time when it was the big buzzword, and it was new and exciting and all that. And same with science, so scientism becomes an important dogma throughout the 1900s.
Yeah, if you could give a scientific explanation to something, it dogmatically becomes truth.
Right. It's required for you to accept the edicts of what scientific institutions pronounce, and if not, then you're weird or you're a strange person. I mean, I'm not saying that. So
we're not criticizing science. We're criticizing. Okay, you've made like man-made global warming, right? There's a scientific consensus. We follow the science by putting masks on. It's like okay. Science is a process of constantly reevaluating and re-questioning and retesting. You can't say, okay, we figured it out, it's done. That's anti-scientific. So scientism is saying, we figured it out and it's done. Therefore, it's the dominant dogma.
Scientism is replacing this method of comparing theories to reality for eternity with a prescription list that is decreed by an institution. That's very different, right? Believing everything that the American Academy of Sciences pronounces is not science. That's the opposite of science. That's dogma, okay? So scientism becomes... So science is... The scientific method even is still applied a lot through the 19th century. But it becomes more and more this thing where, and we'll get to that later, it becomes institutionalized.
Yeah, that's what I was just coming to my mind. Yeah.
Quickly, this terminology. So, like I said here, Peter Zeihan suggests that America patrolling the ocean was a crucial component of massive growth from 1945 through 2015. Global NGOs probably play a bigger role than usual. So this is a time of the United Nations. First the League of Nations, the United Nations, like a whole bucket list of NGOs that are basically just UN groups, which is basically the United Nations is a corporate joint venture. It's probably the best way to describe it.
It was point.
Heavily funded by the Rockefellers and by other big industrialists. Today, the big multi-billionaires, Bill Gates, etc. These are the people who are, in large part, providing the funds that allow these corporate subsidies, I guess you could call them, the UN and its NGOs, to operate, actually.
I want to elaborate on the American patrolling the ocean thing, because it didn't occur to me until I started listening to Peter Zeihan why this is such a big deal. So the story, according to Peter Zeihan, is that after World War II, in order to deal with the Soviet threat, the United States, which A, has the best geography on the face of the planet, and B, increased its industrial capacity like crazy during World War II, and C, was the last man standing. Like, it was the only major country on Earth that wasn't blown to smithereens due to World War II, so it was de facto the power on Earth. It's got this navy now that can control the entire oceans, and so the United States goes to the non-Soviet sphere and says, look, if you let us write your foreign policy in order to contain and deal with the Soviet Union, we will patrol the ocean so everybody can have economic benefit, right? And this is interesting because people refer to the American Empire because, particularly when you look at what Britain controlled in the 1800s versus what America controls today, it's pretty similar. But Peter Zeihan points out that all empires have used this power projection in order to benefit themselves economically, whereas the United States has never been about economics. In fact, the United States is spending its economic power for political benefit, which was to contain the Soviet Union, right? So we've now created a system where it used to be, in order to be a modern country, what did you have to have? It was oil or coal, if you go back earlier, iron, lumber, and agriculture. They got those right? Those are the four? Nima?
Yeah.
You had to have those four. Because you had to create it. You had to use those all yourself to create the things that you needed for a modern economy. Once the United States is patrolling the world, you only had to have one, and then you could trade for the rest of them. So there's no way to see this other than an explosive growth period. Yeah. This is totally an age of expansion, right? And I also wanted to elaborate on the Quigley description of the pluralist economy. So this pluralist economy is the one thing that Quigley doesn't really give a clear explanation of in comparison to the other instruments of expansion that he speaks of anything else, really. The best I understand it is that in the third age of expansion, laissez-faire ruled, which is basically anybody gets to do anything. Whereas in the fourth age of expansion, Nima pointed it out, we have kind of this technocratic government, and power, this is the instrument phase, power is divided by major blocks, major economic blocks, whether this is labor, light industry, agriculture, heavy industry. He had like 8, 9, or 10 of them. I don't remember them off the top of my head. But essentially you had these major power blocks that all vied for power and market share by approaching the governing apparatus that was technocratic, and they got to deal out the market share. And if any one of these blocks started getting too much power, the other blocks would come in to fight with them and get their power down. That was kind of the balancing factor that was the instrument of expansion. Now, obviously, what would it look like if that institutionalized, Nima? Would these power blocks, say, start conglomerating together and not have to fight with each other so much?
They would turn into a monopoly.
Yes.
It would look like a global NGO, like the UN, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Just to go back to what you just said about the automatic versus conscious control. So this is another thing that's interesting. So Quigley identifies distinct phases of where control was automatic, which is everything's more decentralized, alternating with periods of top-down centralized control. So we had the feudal manorial system, which was the age of gestation in Western civilization, and that was more or less decentralized.
Obviously.
Not so much.
Very decentralized.
Very decentralized, not so much planning. Then we go into commercial capitalism, which was basically the chartered company was the defining institution of the time or instrument of the time, and mercantilism. Everything becomes more top-down planned, so more conscious control. We go from feudal manorial to commercial capitalism.
So we've gone decentralized to centralized.
Decentralized to centralized.
Yes.
Then this system, as we mentioned earlier, Napoleon attempts to take over control of the system of commercial capitalism, state mercantilism, but then the industrial revolution happens and thwarts all of that, basically makes it irrelevant. So yeah, you can still try to do what you want, but that's not the thing anymore. We're now in the industrial age. And industrial capitalism started in a more decentralized fashion again, basically.
Laissez-faire. It's laissez-faire now.
Laissez-faire capitalism. So industrial capitalism, financial capitalism. These were phases of laissez-faire, of decentralized control.
Well, and then let's not forget the fact that this industrial capitalism comes from England, which is right next to the Scottish Enlightenment happening at the same time, which is promoting this Adam Smith ultra-atomization of the individual, and that the economy best not only works best, but will address non-economic issues if you just leave it alone. This is the invisible hand, the equilibrium, the balancing act of the economy, or if you just let the government out of it, it doesn't matter if there's vice in the system because things will naturally balance out. That's the prevailing philosophical idea applied to economics happening at the same time that the Industrial Revolution starts. Therefore, really giving the momentum to the laissez-faire idea.
Yeah. So once again, we go from automatic to conscious. We go from automatic in the feudal manorial to conscious in the commercial capitalism, back to automatic control in the industrial capitalism, financial capitalism, and then that petrifies into monopoly capitalism, which coincides with the third conflict. So now we go back to a conscious control system, and that stays in place throughout this whole fourth expansion that we are covering now, which is basically we've been under a much more top-down controlled system. Obviously, with the military patrolling the oceans being an important component, that's the epitome of conscious control, basically.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit. The military is patrolling the oceans militarily, but economically, each individual player can do whatever the hell they want. At the beginning, right? So I'm talking at the beginning. At the beginning of the fourth age of expansion. Now I'm scratching my head. Let's recap and then come back to this point. So we got the manorial system, decentralized. Commercial capitalism, centralized. Industrial capitalism, decentralized. Monopoly capitalism, centralized. So this is your oscillation, like you were saying, between centralized and decentralized systems, right? So you're saying now that the monopoly capitalism kind of doesn't really go away because we've gone to the technocratic system, which is all about planning. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. And that. So it starts, say, in the late 1800s, and more or less has continued until now.
The monopoly capitalism is just a transition from the laissez-faire into this global technocracy, pluralistic economy, controlled system, basically.
Okay. So that sets the stage. If we're saying, okay, there was definitely an age of expansion, after World War II. And if we look at this other pattern of centralized and decentralized, it's happening at a time of heavy centralization.
Yes,
Right.
this is all heavily centralized. America patrolling the ocean, global NGOs, big like pools of money, basically money dressed up in philanthropy, basically running the show all over the world. So UN era mega banks become
the
larger.
UN era, the EU era, Bilderberg's meeting all the time. At this point, going, how do we make the EU? How do we make the EU? How do we make the EU? Right.
Yeah, Bilderberg's, the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, just really big blocks coming together and dictating policy and business to the rest of the world. More global interconnectedness than ever before. Shipping costs per product, like I said, come down to rounding error. That's what's fueled the growth. Living standards in material terms obviously grew. Population size expanded fast. At the same time, this was the prime of Malthusianism, setting the stage for reaction. So this was during the 1900s. These ideas became popular, right? These Malthusian ideas of there's too many people on Earth, the population is too large, technocracy, a global, total global control by a small elite. The 1900s is when this became cool, right? This became popular. This was the new hot idea.
We have a reason for killing all the poor people
Right.
now. Thank
Right.
God. Yes.
It was circulating in elite circles, so it wasn't necessarily out in the open, but it's obviously also the time of H.G. Wells, The Open Conspiracy, written 1928. Edward Bernays writes propaganda about how to run an invisible government to control the public, etc. Then also I took a note here, Hyman Minsky identifies the stage of money manager capitalism beginning in 1969, which is basically nothing but large pools of money like endowments and hedge funds, and I would also count big NGOs, like well-funded NGOs like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rockefellers, obviously the Rothschild, all these benevolent paragons of virtue who are here to save the world. These are all symptoms of this kind of top-down control, money manager capitalism, technocrat-managed, lobbying groups running the show. Data collection, obviously. With all this, data collection becomes more and more important. This is not in Quigley, but this is just my opinion. Without the data technology and information technology that accompanied all of this, none of this would be possible, because how do you coordinate global shipments? How do you coordinate just-in-time delivery, supply chain management, all that stuff, unless you have some business data at least to go by? But then that has also now turned into, we'll get into that actually, we'll get into that in the conflict phase. But opinion molding, like I just said, Edward Bernays, propaganda, big, hugely important new development called PR, public relations. It used to be called propaganda. The term fell into disfavor, so they rebranded it. But it became a big deal to direct people's decision making. Once again, this is top-down control. This is conscious control. This is not automatic, not decentralized. This is top-down management of people's desires and choices. And also the invention of the internet here, which was a military invention, it also kind of lays the groundwork for a potential return to automatic control, which we'll get to that later on.
Decentralized. To the decentralized,
exactly.
Yes.
So now, so this is basically the continuation of Quigley's, of what Quigley hypothesized right before he died, right? It's kind of us trying to complete the picture,
right?
The pluralistic economy, or whether you want to call it the technocratic economy, the lobbyist economy, the military, how about the military industrial economy? That was a famous speech by Dwight D. Eisenhower, where he warns America about the military-industrial complex. And given that the patrolling of the oceans was such an important component of the instrument of expansion during that period, I think it's a significant component of the period as well. So we haven't really come up with a succinct name yet, but all these things, these are the crucial factors during this period. Data as well, I would say, data collection.
And then, but before you jump into that, I got Evolution of Civilizations pulled up here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to list the core components that Quigley ascribes to both the Age of Expansion and the Age of Conflict. So to an Age of Expansion, he says that there's 4 kinds of expansion: increased production of goods. So post World War II, check. Increased population of the society, definitely check. An increase in geographic extent, I would say check on this one as well. Even though the whole world's been conquered at this point, but the West is really pushing their influence everywhere.
Because economies that did not used to join in the Western trade
now
joined in.
Yeah.
So that has, you could say, de facto expanded the geographical scope of
Right.
Western civilization.
And then an increase in knowledge, which I think is fair to say also happened. So now on the flip side, here's signs to look for in the Age of Conflict. So again, the Age of Conflict comes comes about that the instrument of expansion is no longer serving the masses. So what do the masses do? Unable to get ahead, they seek to get ahead by political action, above all taking wealth from their political neighbors. These are wars. At the same time, this is the masses, turn to irrationality to compensate for the growing insecurity of life, for the chronic economic depression, for the growing bitterness and danger of class struggles, and for the growing social disruption and insecurity from imperialist wars. This generally is a period of gambling, the use of narcotics or intoxicants, increasing crime, obsession with sex, growing numbers of neurotics and psychotics, and a growing obsession with death and the hereafter. Do these not hit all the points that we're seeing right now?
Exactly.
Nima. The one point, the growing obsession with death and the hereafter, maybe that applies more to, say, like the rapture crowd, right? But it's definitely still there. I guess you find it less with the woke atheistic crowd. Although I guess they're obsessed with death because they want to kill everybody with stabbies and with the excuse of man-made climate change, right? This is the Extinction Rebellion, for example. Everybody has to die, sort of thing.
Scientism.
Yes.
Scientism is the global technocrats' attempt to compete with a more otherworldly population. People are looking for more beyond what's in this life.
Let me add this. So, the vested interests encourage the growth of imperialist wars and irrationality because both serve to divert the discontent of the masses away from the vested interests and therefore the uninvested surplus that's created within the civilization from what used to be the instrument of expansion. So, before I just keep reading all that, I wanted to use that to set the stage because, first of all, I think we've pretty well concluded that we entered a fourth age of expansion post World War II. Now the question is there evidence of the fourth age of conflict based on what I just described? And I think it's overwhelmingly yes, but let's go over it.
Yeah, so I think the fourth conflict started somewhere, these are never hard dates, but started somewhere around 2001.
With 9/11.
I think with 9/11 was a symbolic cutoff point where it was also accompanied by lower growth. Another big recession happened then. I think the beginning of the 2000s, all over the Western world, I was still in Germany at that time, but this whole problem with growth just beginning to lack in the Western world just became a thing at that point. It was growth rates were not as high as they used to be. Suddenly it became normal to be at 2% growth, 1.5%, to like lackluster, meandering back and forth within these low percentage points.
Well, and then let's emphasize post-2008, which I graduated college in 2009, and I was unique in the sense of the rest of people graduating in 2009, but for people graduating in that era, you were hit with the fact straight to your face that you would not be rewarded in the same way your parents were for participating in the societal norms that you were told to participate in, right? Like, okay, I went to school, I got good grades, where's my job? It wasn't there,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, in terms of growth, not only was there no growth, my generation in particular is hit with the reality of don't even expect it, right? Don't even expect growth. Now you get to struggle paying your rent, even though your parents bought a house when they were fucking 17 and a half for $20. You know, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. Where the idea that you're going to get a job and save up in order to acquire wealth and move forward is just, it's laughable using the rules that were around post World War II, right? During the Age of Expansion, if we apply if we go through the instruments that we were supposed to go through to participate in acquiring some of that surplus, it simply doesn't work anymore. And then if we, what are we looking at here, Nima? World map showing GDP real growth rates for 2009.
Yeah, so you can see how
It ain't the West.
throughout the Western world, very low growth rates, you know, all over the place.
So let's also then talk about imperialist wars. Because what does 2001 kick off, if anything?
Yeah, the global war of terror. I mean, war on terror. Excuse me. And the Patriot Act. Total control.
Let's get to the Patriot Act here in a second. But I mean, just in terms of wars, right? Immediately we launch into Afghanistan, which kind of sort of had an argument behind it, not really. Then there was Iraq, which was just like, oh yeah, we just made that shit up. Totally made that up. Whatever, right? And then I mean,
terrorists. Terrorists.
Libya gets bombed to smithereens. We're in Somalia or some shit. There's Syria going on. It's just one thing after another. Now, I would argue we started seeing this sort of stuff in Vietnam. Like, I think Vietnam, you can argue, wasn't an age of conflict, but I think you can argue it can. You can say, okay, well, you know, we're fighting the Soviet, you know, expansion or something.
Yeah, the Vietnam War was an exercise for the Patriot Act, the war on terror. A lot of technologies that end up being used today were first used in Vietnam. Biological agents, weather control, a lot of things that we see today, they were, you know, they played around with those ideas back then. And that was Vietnam. It was still an age of expansion, obviously. The economy was still growing, even though during that period there was a bit of a hiccup. But it was setting the stage or laying the groundwork for an age of conflict.
Yes.
Definitely.
Now, going back to the Patriot Act, which you brought up, irrationality was one of the key points, right? Well, what the hell was more irrational than the Patriot Act that came out, and then remember, the irrationality and the imperialist wars are promoted by the vested interests. What did the media promote, right? The media promoted the wars in Iraq are good, the war in Afghanistan is good, and the Patriot Act is good, which is essentially forget everything that the society was based on in the past. You know, let's flip the instrument on its head and have it become an institution where, okay, there was this thing called freedom, and we were supposed to do everything that we want to do because we were free, and now, okay, freedom is a sign that you're a terrorist. Just total. Yeah. It's completely fucking insane and completely irrational.
But in the stories, like the idiocy of the stories that were presented to us, just the insulting intellectual insult of a story that some dude in a cave in Afghanistan planned the subversion of the most sophisticated air defense system in the world,
with a satellite and with a laptop and a cell phone.
And so we now have to have permanent groping stations everywhere at the airport, and that sounded like a plan to people.
Yeah.
Right? They were, okay, yeah.
Somebody drugged up without a passport tried to light a bomb in his shoes, so now forevermore we have to take our shoes
Right.
off of the air.
I'm still waiting for the bra bomber. When is that going to happen?
Right. So that'll be fun. So all the women have to flash their tits every time they go to
Yeah.
the.
Well, why has that not happened yet?
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Well, and then fast forward 20 years, we're going to talk about irrationality. The whole I'll use the term woke, which is really a broad term, but I think you see what I'm getting at, where it's not just irrational, it's anti-rational. If you attempt rationality with them, they see that as antagonistic in and of itself. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's not just, we don't make any sense. Oh, you're our enemy because you're trying to make sense, is what it's turned into.
Math and logic have been identified as white supremacy by a couple of these thinkers. So, yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, going forward, Syria's still been a fucking problem. We got this shit going on in the Ukraine, which isn't necessarily the West's imperialist war, but war seems to be ramping up everywhere, is the point that I'm talking about, which the West is obviously gonna have some sort of involvement in. So go ahead.
Yeah, so let's get into the conflict stage.
Yeah.
That we've identified.
I thought we were. Yeah, get into it.
Yeah,
more.
we were.
Go
we
for
were
it.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. We were talking about, but I want to apply some of Quigley's logic, or show how this is consistent with this theory of the stage of conflict. So we have in this period, starting 2001, maybe 2008, 2009, whatever you want to call it. I think 2001 is pretty good because of the symbolic meaning of 9/11. It was a transition into a more top-down, even more top-down control era, which is symptomatic of an age of conflict, right? So, and then obviously war and terror, etc. Global technocrats attempt control of everything by restricting competition in business. Business, to some extent, I think it's become harder to do business. Hyper-regulation, etc. That's been a thing throughout the 1900s. Maybe not so much in the U.S., but definitely in Europe.
It's been here. I mean, it's not the same animal as it is in Europe, but I mean,
Right,
talk to someone who, I mean, for example, built houses in the 50s versus someone who builds houses now. It's not even the same universe.
For sure.
Yeah.
But definitely we can see media, okay? What's the job of the media, generally speaking? It's to bring knowledge to the people, to expose the powerful. That's what they self-congratulate about themselves doing. That's what they claim to be doing all the time. But what is the media today? It's become restricting the flow of information, restricting your knowledge, not investigating the powerful, but providing cover, throwing billions of dollars to run damage control operations for the powerful. So that's a symptom of age of conflict, right? We don't expand knowledge anymore. We don't we don't help people learn more over time. We do the opposite. We keep information from them. We delete information that we don't like. We censor influencers who we don't agree with. We censor dissidents and skeptics of theories that we need in order to, or that our corporate overlords need in order to enforce their agenda, etc. So politics has become more divisive, obviously, as well, and obviously more authoritarian. We just talked about the Patriot Act, the FBI, crackdowns on freedoms, freedom of speech, etc. We see all of that today. Religion, I mean, there's been, you could argue religion has been infiltrated by big business, by the CIA, by powerful institutions trying to control or change the narrative. Look at the Catholic Church today. What a joke is the Catholic Church at this point. I mean, they go more and more go against everything that the Catholic Church used to stand for.
How do we flip the Catholic Church on its head? Is what it's doing right now.
Science. So what is science? Science is the expansion of knowledge, knowledge about the natural world. What has science become today? Science today has become, we need to snuff out and root out everyone who has an opinion that does not comply with the edicts of the global mega corporations and the NGOs and the global technocrats and all the groups that we just mentioned were the ones coming into power and running the show during the expansion phase. Those people are now no longer expanding knowledge, expanding information, but they are spending almost all their efforts on going after people they don't like. I mean, it's really just science has become such a joke in that sense, because it's no longer about expanding knowledge and finding things out and being curious and having a debate. It's curiously become the exact opposite, restricting knowledge, restricting debate, and forcing everybody to listen to your and only your edicts.
I want to take that and expand something here. So where I stopped reading earlier, talking about the vested interests, I'm going to reread part of the paragraph and go on to the next part because it's getting into exactly what you're saying here. So this is back describing why the age of conflict comes about and what the vested interests have to do with it. So the vested interests encourage the growth of imperialist wars and irrationality because both serve to divert the discontent of the masses away from their vested interest, which is, again, the uninvested surplus, going back to the instrument of expansion. Now, he goes on to say, accordingly, some of the defenders of vested interests divert a certain part of their surplus to create instruments of class oppression, instruments of imperialist wars, and instruments of irrationality. Once these instruments are created and begin to become institutions of class oppression, of imperialist wars, and irrationality, the chances of the institution of expansion being reformed into an instrument of expansion become almost nil. This is fascinating, and I think this really brings us to the point now. We have instruments of irrationality, which you just described, right? The media is an instrument of irrationality now. Science is an instrument of irrationality.
The fact checkers are a perfect example of this.
The universities are instruments of irrationality. Schools are instruments of irrationality, right? These are all instruments of irrationality. What are instruments of imperialist wars? Well, the media is an instrument of imperialist war. The defense contractors obviously are an instrument of imperialist war, so on and so forth, right? So now this gets really fascinating, right?
Big tech also, social media.
So again, an instrument is a social organization created with a goal. So if we create a social organization, let's say the media, that has the goal of promoting irrationality, well, what happens when that becomes institutionalized, where the social organization that was created with a bad purpose to begin with now is just self-serving? That's when Quigley says you've passed the point of no return.
Well,
I don't think we've passed that point yet.
Right, but that is where some people are, like the people who are in academia. The people who are on the far left, which is basically academia, most of them, they are in an echo chamber where they can't even imagine doing anything else other than that. So they have to keep going with this full throttle. They have no other incentive, but they are becoming a self-serving oligarchy or elite, ostensible elite, that has no purpose, doesn't serve any purpose.
Societal purpose, other than themselves.
Other than for themselves, right. So that's why they need to keep defending stupider and stupider theories and ideas. And they need to keep doubling down more and more, and they get more and more insane.
So,
and it's almost like, yeah.
Sorry, he goes on, and this is just so important, is that he talks about how these three new vested interests, in combination with the old vested institution of expansion. So we got three new instruments compared with the institution of expansion. The institution of expansion starts to lose its privilege and its position in comparison to these three new instruments of oppression. Well, I mean, that's one of them. Class oppression is one of them. And he says, of these three, the institution of class oppression controls much of the political power of society. The institution of imperialist wars controls much of the military power of society. And the institution of irrationality controls much of the intellectual life of society. These three become dominant. These three become dominant, and the group that formerly controlled the institution of expansion falls back into a secondary role, and its surplus is largely absorbed by its own creations, these three. So, what's the fight happening now? Because what's the title of the show? The fifth age of expansion of the West, right? And this ties into what you were talking about with, we're going back and forth between decentralized and centralized and decentralized and centralized. There's a lot of cool stuff happening right now, which I think we can argue we're seeing the beginnings of a fifth age of expansion. I mean, I guess the beginnings. We're more than just seeing the beginnings at this point. We're seeing a lot of evidence that suggests that there's a battle right now for a fifth age of expansion to happen. So you mentioned first and foremost the internet. What other evidence are we seeing that's looking like we might be able to circumvent this fourth age of conflict leading into demise of the West?
The alternative media, cryptocurrency.
Yeah, us right now, right?
Yeah. Facilitated by cryptocurrency. A lot of alternative media couldn't exist without a decentralized medium of exchange that the old powers don't have control over. And guess who are the people who hate cryptocurrency? It's all the assholes who are clinging on to power right now because they're used to having so much power throughout the 1945 through 2015 era.
So, I mean, let's analyze these in particular. So we said the internet, and then in particular we have alternative media, because we just talked about how the mainstream media right now, we didn't use that term, but obviously that's what we're talking about. The mainstream media has turned into a thing where instead of trying to give you information, it tries to restrict information. Now, for us to reform that, it's probably a lost cause. Instead, we can circumvent it. These are Quigley's terms. Circumvent it by creating a new thing that makes the old thing obsolete. Right?
Exactly.
There's a fight right now to see if that's actually going to be successful. And I think the vested interests are losing. Right? They tried doing it by saying, okay, there's three major platforms. We got YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll censor those and restrict those. But all it's done is pushed us off into newer platforms that they don't have control over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's just finish off here on the conflict.
Yeah, go for it.
Then we can get into the fifth expansion. So we have science. We also have social life, right? We have power and control exerted over the social sphere, and we saw that in its full ugliness beginning 2020 with lockdowns, social distancing, stabby mandates, which I think I would almost call them borderline genocidal. But these are all, once again, efforts to restrict society's ability to move around and to restrict the population as a whole.
Ability to travel or do anything, yes.
We restrict the population growth in numbers as well by killing off people. And also, we have elite ideology officially petrifies into open Malthusianism to restrict the things achieved in the expansion. So now, it's no longer, Malthusianism is no longer a thing that's the aristocrats and the elites talk about in closed rooms and giggle about secretly, but it's the thing that's obviously openly promoted now, right? We see Bill Gates.
Well, what about Canada? Like, literally, I'm your doctor. Have you considered killing yourself?
Right.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates, at a TED Talk years ago, he went through, he shows like some simplistic equation about that involves population numbers, and he says, well, the only thing we can do is reduce population, right? And the public chuckles. So
in order to decrease CO2, right?
Yeah.
This horrible gas that's contaminating the earth.
Right. So that's an important component. That's why the hypothesis of catastrophic man-made climate change is such an important component of this elite hanging on by a thread right now to save themselves and to reconsolidate their power. Obviously data access is being monopolized more and more into the hands of a few big mega corporations. That's the whole problem with the cloud model, basically, in my opinion. It's a model that lends itself to centralized control ultimately. Mm-hmm. Um, I said here maybe they're trying to, maybe you could try data monopoly capitalism, but who knows? Conscious control petrifies into absolute global totalitarianism. So that's the world that they dream about now openly. It's the world that they talk about in their WEF and their TED talks. Everyone's going to be chipped. We'll know everyone's movements everywhere at any point in time, what they eat, how much they fly, how much they drive, how much crimes they commit against the climate, basically, in their ideology. So now we get into what Dylan just started alluding to, the
Fifth
the
age
hope.
of expansion. Tragedy and hope. Here's our hope.
Right. So is there a fifth age of expansion on the horizon? What are the components? How do we identify the components of that age? Well, and one easy way to identify is that everything that these assholes are against right now, everything that these people, the people
technocrats.
who, the technocrats who go to the World Economic Forum and who have TED Talks and who self-congratulate, all they jerk each other off basically on the public stage. Everything they hate, right? They hate decentralized cryptocurrency. They hate the alternative media. They hate nationalism. They hate
anything that
debate.
doesn't conglomerate control into one spot.
Right, they hate open debate. They hate discussion. They hate thinking for yourself. They even said this themselves in newspaper articles now on the New York Times. Don't think for yourself. Trust the experts, right? That's also something Quigley, by the way, I want to read that quote. Can you find that quote from Quigley where he talks about
Do you remember
the experts?
roughly what okay, keep talking. I think I remember roughly where it is. Yeah.
Actually, I don't know where, but I also wrote it down somewhere. But basically, and it's also somewhere on the internet, so I can pull it up in a little bit. That's fine.
Okay, I'll keep looking while you talk. Go ahead and talk.
Yeah. But Quigley, actually, curiously, he mentions the word expert specifically. He says that with this phenomenon of going from an instrument to an institution, it's the phenomenon of experts. So he says experts are the last people you want to rely on. It doesn't mean that you don't listen to experts or whatever, but to give experts the final say and the total power over something without any checks and balances is to give power to a group of people that's no longer interested in achieving the goals of the instrument that the instrument was supposed to achieve, but they are much more interested in maintaining their own power and protecting their existing theories instead of, proliferating new theories, joining in some kind of open debate to improve technologies and things like cryptocurrencies, etc., alternative media technologies that empower the individual. These are things that give these people bed sores, right? And that's how, here, another example, 3D printing. I also put that down here. 3D printing enables everyone in their home to manufacture things and to bypass / skip a giant part of the current global supply chain. Peter Zeihan also identifies 3D printing as one of the future technologies that will be important as the global supply chains break apart. Peer-to-peer technology dominates. I also think homesteading is making a comeback. I mean, you hear more about that, you read more about people trying to grow food for themselves. And if this global expansion becomes the thing, right now, if it is a thing, we're in its infancy. But as it moves along, the globalist technocrat experiment could provide a memory of the mistakes of the past, of this excessive top-down totalitarian control system, and automatic control returns, ideally, in this new fifth expansion phase.
I found it.
Oh, sweet.
So everything is too important ever to be entrusted to professional experts, because every organization of such professionals and every established social organization becomes a vested interest institution more concerned with its efforts to maintain itself or advance its own interests than to achieve the purpose that society expects it to achieve. As a consequence, wait, is this it? Was that it?
Yeah.
That was it. Okay. I wanted to keep reading, but he starts getting into examples. But I mean, that's essentially the point. Is if you have an expert from anywhere, from the medical system or the school system or the military system or the political system or whatever, the interest, is that the word I want? The interests of that expert aren't necessarily the best interest for you.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't, like, on its face, you can't trust an expert with your, I mean, like you said, it's not that you don't listen to them, but you can't trust their advice.
Right, you can't rely on them. You can't give them the final say. And the phrase "trust the experts" is the embodiment of that mentality. Of they get the final say. Don't do your own research. I mean, this is literally what the New York Times and other these publications have begun saying throughout the Kufit scam. Don't do your own research, because it used to always be a good thing. Used to be a good piece of advice, right? Do your own research.
Yes.
Think for yourself. Now suddenly it literally became, no, don't do your own research. Listen to the experts. Trust the experts. Trust the science. The science, uppercase, trademark word.
I want to bring some Peter Zahan back into this, coming to this fifth age of expansion, because again, if we overlap this with what you mentioned, the decentralized, centralized, decentralized, centralized, obviously since the monopoly capitalism era that you described, we've seen more and more and more centralization, where basically, like you said, we've got one country that patrols the whole world's oceans, and we have a bunch of technocrats that meet in these big meetings that go and influence their individual countries to guide some unified policy, right? Well, if that social order is breaking down, and Peter Zahan goes into a bunch of different reasons why this is the case, but the one I'm going to focus on in the moment is the fact that the United States appears to be no longer interested in patrolling the oceans of the world in order to guarantee economic security for anybody who wants to participate. And the reason for this is the Soviet Union fell in the early 90s, right? Because the whole purpose of patrolling the oceans for the United States is saying, we'll spend our economic surplus to have political security on the oceans or military security on the oceans so everybody else can achieve economic surplus in exchange for us focusing our effort against the Soviet Union. That's gone. Soviet Union's not there anymore. It's gone. So the American public in general has become more and more isolationist, more and more nationalistic on both sides of the aisle. I mean, you got the left ostensibly, right? The in quotes real progressives that are still here. They don't want any war. They don't want us meddling with all the shit abroad. And the populists on the right, same thing. Like, stop. We're done. We don't want this anymore. And I mean, the whole Trump/Bernie Sanders thing. Not saying anything about those two individuals in particular, but the desire of the people promoting those individuals has pointed toward stop messing with everything in the world. Well, as Peter Zahan has pointed out, the whole world structure is set up on the fact that things can be traded easily, economically. Well, if that goes away, we're going to start seeing things break up into regional blocks. And if things are breaking up into regional blocks, that goes back to what you were saying, Nima, that's a huge push toward decentralization as opposed to centralization, right?
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
In particular, and this is really unfortunate to a large swath of the world, is that those countries since World War II that didn't have the four products that I described before, again, oil, iron ore, timber, and agriculture, that for the last 80 years, if they had one, they could trade for the others. Well, now it's going to be, you can't trade for the others. So the whole Middle East that's been trading oil for everything else suddenly can't get everything else because no one can buy their oil safely and they can't get the modern products in. How are these populations going to survive? Literally from the food or the inability to access oil. So large parts of the earth, ostensibly, are going to become backwater. I mean, I don't know if they're going to become medieval, but maybe they're going to be like steam level technology. It's like, well, we all seem to have coal, so we're, a lot of places are going to go back to relying on fucking coal, right?
And lumber even.
Lumber.
for energy.
Sure. So, again, while that's tragic for the rest of the world, what does that mean for the West? Now, let's define the West quickly. We've got Western Europe, United States and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and I guess you could argue also South Africa, right? This whole crumbling does appear to affect Europe greatly. And I guess Germany is really in a bad spot. However, France seems to be like it'll come out okay. This is me repeating Peter Zahan. If you want to know the reasons, go watch his videos. France might come out okay. Britain has the possibility of coming out okay. The United States is like sitting on a fucking altar of gold in comparison to what's going to happen everywhere else. I believe Australia's got a pretty good outlook, which means New Zealand also probably has a pretty good outlook. I don't think South Africa has that good of an outlook, but we could talk about that later.
But Sweden also.
So
Sweden, he's optimistic.
But Italy, he's not optimistic. So there's parts of Europe that look like they're going to suffer, which is kind of the core, the original core of Western civilization. However, even if the original core is gone, we've spread out so far that what's left looks like it's going to be in a pretty decent situation, relatively speaking. And if we have these things happening, like what me and Nima just described, there's this battle happening right now of the old fourth age of conflict institutions battling the new fifth age of expansion. Well, I'll use the term technology for lack of a better word. It's more than just technology, but the new technology coming forth. I mean, it is more than that. Let's talk about this briefly too. Let's talk about religion and intellectual. The religious part of the spectrum and the intellectual part of the spectrum. Quigley points out that in modern West, and when he says modern, we're talking like the 60s when he's writing this book, right? Is that in turn, if you're going to score each of these six gradations of culture, which he has military, political, economic, social, religious, and intellectual. I'm not sure if they're exactly in that order, but he's got these six things, and you can say, okay, you can kind of rate a civilization on whether they're advanced or backward. Modern Western civilization at the time was very backward on the religious scale because we're all atheists, right? And that kind of led us down the road of scientism, if to make the conversation short on that. But what are we seeing? There's this huge resurgence and interest in religion. Strangely enough, Eastern Orthodox, which is not necessarily what's the word I want? Not coherent, but congruent with Western civilization, so I that's an interesting conversation. But even the Catholic Church, as much as you made fun of it, which I agree deserves being made fun of, you got people like E. Michael Jones jumping up and down going, look, this is the philosophy of Christ, of Christology, or whatever you want to call it, and how it applies to creating society, and here's why it makes sense, and here's why it's fallen short, and here's how we need to fix it. There's a push toward that direction, right? And so if we can get some sort of coherent religious idea, that in and of itself is part of creating a foundation for a good expansion, right?
Yeah.
And then also let's look at the intellectual, because like you said, over the last 150 years or so, Malthusianism, social Darwinism, technocracy, all that was all the cool intellectual shit. Right? Well, what's the fighting back intellectual ideas? It's re-looking at like the American Revolution concept of freedom and separation of government and debate and rationality and logic and trivium. That's the intellectual discussion happening on the forbidden corners of the internet right now.
Yeah,
right.
Going back to the pursuit of happiness, to the freedom of the individual to pursue their goals as long as they leave others alone.
Yeah. So,
open debate.
Open debate.
This has to be defended now, right? This is like a controversial idea.
It has to be defended, but that makes us that much better at defending it.
Right.
And then going back to what you mentioned about cryptocurrency, so avoiding the argument of, what's the value of crypto, which we've talked about in the past on previous shows, go check them out. What's the value of crypto, and is it a scam? Is it fraud? This FTX thing just happened and the crash and the thing. Forgetting all that for a second. There is a major, major utility of crypto that for whatever reason, people like Peter Zahan are just either ignoring or not seeing, which is the fact you could still facilitate financial transactions if the institutionalized financial system decides to kick you out. Right?
Exactly. And to people who don't challenge the status quo much, this doesn't mean anything because they've never been censored anywhere. They literally don't see the problem with that. They've never experienced it, and they don't have friends who haven't experienced it. This goes back to that academic echo chamber. So to those people, they are just they can't wait for crypto to go away. They're just wondering, why is this thing still here?
What's this weird thing? Yeah.
Who needs this? Yeah. So.
Well,
exactly.
and then if we compare to something like Gab, right? Gab is explicitly religious in a Christian sense, right? Which the powers that be hate. It's explicitly nationalistic. And I'm not talking about the conversation happening on it. I'm talking about the founding principles of this thing, right? It's explicitly pro-free speech, and it's explicitly a competitor to specifically Twitter. But I mean, it's specifically Twitter. But I would argue also Facebook and YouTube at this point, right?
Facebook more so probably at this point,
right?
Yeah.
Because it's where the majority of the conversations were happening on the internet on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Twitter being the smallest of the three, but I mean it's still significant. And he's circumventing that, and the way that the powers that be tried to shut it down was by attacking him on a financial level, in the sense of, you can't have a payment processor, you can't have a bank account, you can't have a credit card, you can't have any of this. How did they survive? With cryptocurrency, right? And then that was another premise that I forgot to mention. Gab is premised on decentralization, and it was funded by decentralization technology, right? So we've got all this stuff pointing toward a fifth age of expansion that specifically is swinging the pendulum back toward decentralization over centralization. So despite the fact that we're seeing all this crazy stuff that are clear indicators of a fourth age of conflict, we're also seeing this incredibly hopeful stuff of indicators of a fifth age of expansion. That's I guess essentially that's what we want to get across here today, and the fact that Nima finally put together a coherent post-Quiglian description of what's happened after World War II.
Right. It's an attempt to that, and I think it's pretty good, pretty refined at this point. Obviously, there's mistakes, and there's going to be things we find out that are wrong, but I think the big picture makes more sense to me now than it did before.
I don't think he's on anymore, but we've had a listener make a bunch of comments.
Yeah.
Have it addressed. Let's address some of these for posterity's sake here.
So, unfortunately, I don't know what he was referring to.
This is way at the beginning. The institution survivance becomes bigger than its original purpose. Yeah, he's just commenting on what we were talking about at the beginning.
You do? I don't. Please do tell. I don't know what that means. Not gonna lie, I'm not a fan of Peter. I have watched him, and I have watched y'all. Sorry, was there other stuff that I'm not seeing before that?
No.
Okay. And I've watched y'all lessons based on Peter demographics analyzed. I just don't fully see it, but I'm an open-minded guy.
I guess, I wish he was still on to elaborate on that question.
Right. I mean, but like you said before, take everything that Peter Zahan says with a grain of salt.
Take everything we say with a grain of salt, for that matter.
Everything we say with a grain of salt. So, he casts such a wide net. He provides a big picture. He's going to make mistakes on the details. There's no way around.
And then, like we said, okay, he's an expert in geopolitics and he's an expert in demographics. Does that mean he's an expert in cryptocurrency?
Absolutely not.
Right. So give the man a break for, what's the German saying? Wer nicht arbeitet, keinen Fehler macht. right?
Wer nicht arbeitet, macht keine Fehler.
Yeah, okay, there we go. He who doesn't work never makes mistakes, right? It's easy to take this guy who does like a speech every other day in front of a large audience, has written multiple books, has all these YouTube channels, and jump on and criticize him because he's put stuff out there to criticize. Where's your shit to criticize, right?
Right. No, I mean, I understand. He could just shut up about crypto if he knows nothing about it. So I think I get that point, right? Why do you have to comment on something you know absolutely nothing about? But it's not the relevant component of his analysis.
Right.
He looks at the next 10 to 20 years, right? So there's a lot of stuff happening with the physical world, with not the digital, but the physical world, food and machinery and agriculture, and that's the stuff he's worried about.
Right.
So maybe cryptocurrency is not going to be that as important over the coming decade. Maybe the world's going to have other problems to deal with that rank higher in the priority order of the world.
And then just because we're seeing the rumblings of this stuff that'll lead to a fifth age of expansion doesn't mean that it's controlling a significant aspect of society. Right? Like, of the things that we just described,
happen tomorrow.
Yeah, of the things that we just described, the agricultural system is still utilizing the current financial system, right? Like there's a part of the agricultural system that's utilizing this cryptocurrency.
Well, the agriculture, he also goes in his book, agriculture is like the highest value traded product in the world, or something along those lines. I mean, it's important. It's our food. It's what we consume. It's what makes us, what our bodies need. So,
and I think if he's doing this demographic analysis, I mean, unless he's working with completely fucking made up numbers, what's there to argue with? Right? I mean, it's like, okay, here's the demographic shape of this country, and here's the demographic shape of that country, and China's got a problem it's looking at, right? Germany's got a problem it's looking at. Russia's got a problem it's looking at. Yeah.
Did you see the
what?
Did you see the breaking news that came out last night?
Maybe. What
about China?
Oh yeah, that they finally released their census report, and I also read or listened to Peter Zahan's reaction to that he posted this morning on a YouTube video.
No, I didn't see that, but this is what he's been saying all this time, beginning to materialize now.
Well,
I haven't heard anyone else talk about this.
Well, and not only is he saying this, he's saying that this happened a long time ago. The government's just now admitting it.
Yeah.
Because they had census numbers from before, which suggested that their previous census numbers had overestimated the population by 100 million people.
Yeah,
so when we say that China's population just dropped, no, it was never actually that big to begin with, and it was already dropping. Sorry, go ahead.
They looked at the numbers, and they couldn't believe them, and they sent them back to produce new numbers. So that was what Zehan said in his book and several speeches. And he also said, I think they better believe the numbers the next time they get them. They won't look much better. And they will probably realize that they'll have to believe those numbers now. So we are now, so China reported a drop of roughly 850,000 people in 2022. First decline since 1961, the last year of China's Great Famine.
Well, and again, this is the official release that China's giving out, which means it's way worse than whatever the heck they said. And in particular, if that 100 million phantom people is true, they're likely after the one-child policy was created. And that means all those 100 million people apply, in the age of 40 or below, which are all the people needed to work and make new people. Right? So it's like the worst. If you're going to remove people from the demographic, that's the worst place to remove them from the demographic. So it looked bad to begin with, but then when you remove these 100 million people from that demographic, it looks even worse.
So there's no turning back from this development now, because the people who could be turning this around don't exist because of China's one-child policy, and because of this record amount of people now going into retirement, and the urbanization, industrialization has deceived us into believing that China's population has grown, which the numbers grow obviously if your people live longer and longer, then you have more people because fewer people die. But those people who were put into condos, best case scenario, a lot of them were put into little tiny coffin boxes almost to live in and to slave away in factories where they can't start a family. And so now we have these old people retiring, and the young generation doesn't exist that could be providing the future people for the countries.
The official numbers, Peter Zehan just went over. China put their average replacement rate right now at 1.1 per woman, and that in order to maintain your population, you have to be at 2.1. This is like really bad. It's really, really, really bad, right? So, and I mean, we got kind of distracted on China here. That's not the point of the show today. But we're just going over Peter Zehan, where we think he's really stellar versus on something like demographics versus somewhere where we don't really believe him, say on cryptocurrency. But I think that was a great show today, Nima. I think we have officially posited the Carol Quiglian interpretation into the future past when he died, and I think we've got something functional to work with. So high five.
and we have given hope, because this is a hopeful future, I think.
Yes.
If it holds true.
Yes. Awesome. Well, this has been Dylan Moore and Nima Major of Irida TV. We've been here doing it live. Come over to irida.tv to come check us out. And as Nima has explained previously, we ask you for $0. We have never, ever asked anyone for any fucking money. Right? Maybe we will in the future, but for right now, we're not. We're probably the only podcast you've ever heard that isn't begging you for money or begging you to buy supplements. So if you could do us a favor and share some of this stuff around, you can find all of our social media over at irida.tv. Choose your favorite, share your favorite out. That would really give us a lot of support. So please do that, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.